we go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first ever author interview for the month of June. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining me today is a very special guest, one I've had the opportunity to meet twice, one at last year's, if I remember correctly, the Los Angeles Comic Convention, and more recently at this year's LA Festival of Books. Now, my guest today is a novelist, comic writer, screenwriter, director, and publisher. She was born on a military base in 29 Palms and grew up on the shores of Lake Michigan. She graduated from the University of Michigan and lives in Los Angeles with her two daughters, partner, and a German Shepherd mix. Her fiction explores a wide variety of themes, including family, survival, injustice, and the environment. She loves reading and drawing inspiration from folklore, mythology, fairy tales, and classic ghost stories. She also writes and publishes comics. She began her writing career as a screenwriter and has directed a sci-fi time travel film. She is a climate justice advocate who promotes green spaces and urban forestry, habitat restoration projects, school gardens, sustainability, and environmental education. And the book we will be talking about today is, of course, Plastic Girl. Now, Plastic Girl is her coming-of-age series set in a climate apocalypse. And her other series that she is known for is the Mary Shelley School for Monsters, which is her horror graphic novel series. Her short sci-fi fiction can be found on Terraform, and her short horror comics have appeared in anthologies such as Cthulhu Is Hard to Spell and Nightmare Theater. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, fellow author, and a very good friend of mine, Jessica Maison. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Hi, Gabriel. Thank you so much for having me. It is a thrill to come on your show, and it's been a pleasure to meet you and talk to you about writing books and other authors at the couple times we've met. So it's really great to be here.
Absolutely. And yours, let me tell you, Jessica is an incredible author. As I mentioned before, earlier this year, I had the opportunity to meet up with her again at the LA Festival of Books, as well as two other guests. Matt, who I also had the opportunity to meet at the LA Comic-Con the year before, as well as a new friend, Megan, part of this amazing trio of theirs, and they are incredible authors. So be on the lookout for follow-up interviews with them down the road. But let's get back to Jessica. Jessica, I am so excited to have you here on the show. It's been a long time coming, and I'm just so excited to share with the viewers and listeners about your series, Plastic Girl, which I remember the pitch you gave me when we met at Los Angeles Comic Convention, and it just blew my mind. So, as a little teaser, not to spoil too much, what can you tell us about Plastic Girl?
Well, Plastic Girl is about a young girl. It's set in the climate apocalypse, so there's only a few kids left alive. Everyone has been killed by a wasting disease. And she is very scientific and artistic minded. And so she goes out on her lake every day to try to find something alive, anything. And one day she finds something that is alive, but it's a brand new species. It seems like it shouldn't be alive, and maybe it was born out of our garbage. And as she explores it, they form a symbiotic relationship, hopefully not parasitic, and they start healing the area around them. And strangely enough, she's able to start making new creatures. So first it's like a butterfly, then it's something bigger like a deer, and then a bear. And finally, she makes a sister, and then things get really strange. And the question of the book is it science? Is it mutation? Is it she's losing her mind? Is it magic? And you kind of go through the series and figure that out with her. So
awesome. That is incredible. And if I'm not mistaken, there's also, well, how many books are in this series? There's three, correct? Or is there more coming in the series?
There's three. It's a trilogy, but it has a prequel novella called Plastic Girl Evolution, because originally it was just going to be that. It was going to be a short story for my daughters, and then it kind of just grew out of control, somewhat like the creatures in the book.
Awesome. So before we dive deeper into Plastic Girl and how the story came about, let's talk a little bit more about you, Jessica. So from your bio, you've done a lot and you've been a lot. You've been a
Mhm.
director, you're a comic writer, you're a publisher, novelist, climate change activist. You're the whole nine yards. So how did this passion for creativity sort of come about growing up for you?
Well, for me, I think a lot, and the why there's so much nature involved in that passion is I was outside a lot. And we always had a lot of animals, and like both my grandparents and my parents kind of instilled that in me. And I was with my brothers and sisters a lot. And the other thing with being outside a lot, we were always going to the library as well. And so there was a combination of, you know, traveling to the riding your bikes to the library, getting books, getting inspired by stories. My mom was a writer, so I was inspired by her telling stories, and then it just kind of evolved from there, and it just was a lifelong thing. So I would say from very young, I loved engaging in story, and I really liked stories that were set outdoors and in magical realms and things like that. So yeah, I mean, that's the beginning of it. I mean, and then it just evolved to writing my first short story in ninth grade. And then, discovering journalism in high school and just always being in creative writing classes. And then in college, I discovered screenwriting and film and kind of got all drawn into that as well. So, yeah. And then out here, after I did the whole film career, I still do film, but I did like the film thing, and I had my kids, and I really liked comics, and I wanted to get back into that. And I wanted to write that book I'd meant to write in college. So I started working on that, and then that brought me back to these mediums, and I'm glad I wrote the book. It was like first I was going to write short stories, and then I'm like, no, I'm going to write the book. I'm going to do the book. And so that's what happened with well, there was a book before Plastic Girl, but I haven't published it yet. Plastic Girl was the first one that I published. So
awesome. That's
yeah.
amazing. So you've done an incredible amount, as you just said, you've done everything. You've directed film, comic writing. You're also a publisher for Wicked Tree Press and many more. So I'm very curious, Jessica, at what point in your career did you realize that that's what you wanted to do? You wanted to take your passion and build upon it and make it into a career, your aha moment.
Well, that's like for just all of it. Yeah, I think my aha moment probably came somewhere in college when I realized I was always going to be driven to write fiction. I had originally wanted to do journalism and law and, go after all these big, bad corporate guys and everything like that. And at some point I was writing, I realized no matter what I was doing, I would always come back to fiction. It's like that was the more appealing place for me to explore kind of my issues with the world around me, the way, the conversation I wanted to have and everything like that. So I think my aha moment was probably, I would say somewhere like sophomore year in college, where I realized that I was never going to stop doing this. So I might as well try to pursue a career in it. Yeah. So
incredible. That is amazing. And honestly, I've had a chance to read, haven't read fully Plastic Girl, but just the first few chapters, I'm blown away by the story, the characters, and the world. I've always been fascinated about how authors approach the worlds in their stories, like what makes them unique, what makes them really shine to show their authenticity. And all those are going to be talked about later in the interview, but I decided just to bring that up to mention that it's an incredible book, and I cannot wait to finish this and dive into the next one, which I'm just looking at my wall of books, which is Plastic Girl Extinction. That is the second book, correct?
That is the second book, yes. And yeah, and I don't want, it's very like in the first book, you kind of get into what is this power, this thing, this species, how is she interacting with it? They're rebuilding the island, and then a group of other last surviving children, young adults show up, and they kind of turn into a little Lord of the Flies situation, right? And so, yeah, and so she has to battle some boys from her past. And everyone, of course, is, battling for resources. There's been hardly anything to eat. Everything is rotting, everything is dying. And now they have life on this island. So now this island is very appealing to everybody. And so they have to kind of manage not only this development of Eva, the main character, and Iris, the kind of the leader of the new species, the polylilacs, and they are trying to figure out how to work together and trust each other while also dealing with this outside force. And so you go, and that's the whole kind of first book. And then when you go into Extinction, you're going deep into the island's caves to kind of figure out the source of all of this, part of the source. And then and I don't want to skip ahead to the third book, but when you get to Eradication, you are going to have another group of strangers show up who are more like the scientists, and you're going to figure out how it all kind of happened and came together. So
interesting. Okay, well, that's a nice little teaser and what to expect for book 2 and book 3.
Yeah, it's not ruining anything. Stuff is coming.
That's good. That's good. But I like how it does, set up the world, and it like all takes place on this island. But of course, you are going to, as you've just said, Jessica, the outside world and what's happening is going to impact the main characters and the setting of the story, which is, of course, the island. So now let's talk about the creation and the setup of Plastic Girl. So walk me through it, Jessica. You're now at your computer, or maybe you are going old school with a notepad and pencil or pen, and you're jotting down the rough idea, the outline of Plastic Girl. When you began hashing out the details, what were the goals you had for the series as the author, as well as the promise you were making to your future readers?
So my goal was to start with this young girl. She was completely alone. She had lost her parents, but her parents had taught her all of these skills to survive, not only like physically, but emotionally in this kind of hard setting. And I wanted you to get to know her kind of very in an isolated state at first, and you're just with her. And my whole goal for this series was to have her kind of discover the next step of evolution and explore what humanity's role might be in it at a very personal level. Like, does she belong? Will she survive? Will she be part of it? But through that whole thing is to actually find a family that she, find some connection, find a family, get out of the isolation, because she's living completely by herself for like 4 years, I think, before anyone shows up, And so that's kind of I when I think about the end of the world, or and everyone's dying off, it's that loneliness you see in so many shows and so many movies of that main character, being so alone, and then when they finally meet somebody, how does that go? And it's usually very masculine, which is fine. It's like people are butting heads. Like you got you just have people butting heads, and even in Mad Max, like with the original one, it's like, he doesn't know what to do with emotion or what to do when he finally, because there's so much violence. And so I just really so what I was really promising myself and my audience is I was going to take this young woman from like the age of 12 up until like, I think in the end, I don't want to get into how old she is by the time the book is over, but take her through kind of this very formative time, and give her back a family that she had lost, and also give her some hope, because for me as a mom, I was having a hard time imagining a hopeful future, like with climate and the way we were doing it. So I wanted to write something like, if we did everything wrong, and my daughters ended up at the end, would there be a turn of the page that could include humanity and include hope, include healing the planet? And that's kind of where I was going with this story the whole time. And so my promise at the end of this series is that you'll get a little bit of that. It's not, So
okay, that's actually really good, because whenever we read or even see movies about the apocalypse, sometimes it does seem like, well, can there be like a bright side, or a path forward in some of the very bleakest of scenarios? So I like that how you don't really say there is going to be there is going to be some good things down the road, but you leave it up to the readers interpretations, like there could be some good things down the road. Are they going to be difficult? Is it going to be challenging? Absolutely. But after everything the characters and the main characters have gone through, there is a chance that, things might get better and we've learned our lesson and we can
Mhm.
hopefully not repeat history.
Yes.
And with that message that you sort of went for in your book, was that the same emotional feeling that you got from friends and family who learned that you were working on this book when you told them that you're starting on this new book and this is the theme, or rather the message you're trying to get across?
Did they react well to it?
Yes.
I mean, I have a couple friends who have read this series and absolutely love it. My husband loves it. I mean, my sister really likes it. My mom really likes it. So I would say my close friend readers and my family readers do really like it. There is a lot about family there, like how our family defines who we are, no matter after they're gone. There you have, so you carry them with you. So I like that idea that we're like these vessels that we carry bits of our different family members with us and we've learned lessons from them. Um, and I think when I tell people the idea, they really like it. I think where this story is a little bit different than a YA typical story now,
Mm.
it's told in us, I would say, in the older YA fashion, the older, it's more coming from different perspectives. So there are several point of views going on. And it's told, it's not told in a first person. And so you are having a much more methodic opening, you're like going into it.
Right.
A lot of, there's a lot of great action. And yeah, so I feel like a lot of my family really were probably glad I was doing it. Cause for me, and what I try to tell students when I'm working with them is like, when you feel too angry or full of despair or upset about something, it's best to try to write, don't get rid of all that. You want to have that all in there, but to write some kind of hope involved in your story, or at least process it, because it's much safer in fiction. It's safer in fiction to explore the end of the world than to like just look around you and get sucked into every horrible thing that's happening right now, which is a lot. It's a lot for young people to
Mm.
deal with. I kind of rambled there, but sometimes I do that. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right what you said, Jessica, that, you want to like show there is some like a positive outlook to even the most dire of situations. And I really think, again, I'm still very early in
Yeah.
Plastic Girl, but I can definitely see, where I'm at right now. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone who
Okay.
hasn't read the book yet, but I'm at the part where definitely it feels like there is no hope yet at the moment, and the main character is definitely at their lowest, or one of their lowest. There probably could be more scenes like that later in the book, but I like how you provide some optimism, which I greatly enjoy. And this kind of leads into another question. It's what I call a reflective question. Now, overall, from being a comic writer, film director, novelist, all of that, you've worked on many projects for different audiences, for different groups, of course. And in today's digital age, it's new territory because, as authors and as creators, when we work on something, we put our whole heart into it because it is like our baby. We dedicate a lot of time to making sure it's the best version it can be. And when we share it with others beyond our inner circle of friends and family, there is a hesitancy and nervousness of whether or not people are going to accept it. And especially now in a digital age, that's more critical more than ever, because on one side, while we do leave ourselves exposed to a lot of, hate speech, trolls, negativity, and so forth, we also find the positive side. We meet, fellow authors, fellow writers, fellow enthusiasts that, write similar to us or have the same temperament and mentality.
Yeah.
And I find that very fascinating. And of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be there for every creator. I don't care who you are or what people say, it's always going to be there in the back of our minds, waiting to strike. So, ultimately, Jessica, the question that I pose to you is this. Throughout your career thus far, what has disciplined you to continue honing your craft in various other mediums? And have you ever had certain moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome throughout your career?
Well, I think it's impossible not to have imposter syndrome like at all times because
Mm,
it doesn't matter. I mean, there are some people obviously they get to certain, I think even people way up high start to wonder, how did I get this? How did I get this opportunity? Why do I deserve to be telling these stories when there's all these other talented people? And so I think there's a lot of that even at the highest level of creation, like when we're talking about huge filmmakers, huge TV directors, huge authors. I think they all get some of that. They might not talk about it, but I think they all get it. For me, I know what you're talking about. Like, especially when you start something new. Like when I
mm,
jumped into comics, I was very new at it. So I was creating a comic with my artist friend who was a muralist. So we had never done a comic. So we both wanted to learn it. I was going to conventions. I was trying to figure out how to do it. And I was meeting all these really great independent comic creators and other and traditional comic creators and just talking to them. And I think no matter what, as I got better at doing comics and even, won an award for one of my comics, it's still, you still feel there's always someone better than you. There's always someone you read. I just read a stack of really great graphic novels and I love what I do, but I also, you'll read something like, God, that was profound. That was so beautiful. It was so great. Like, how could I ever write? You get like that. Everyone gets that. Like, I wish I could have written something like that. And I think you just got to shut those when you start hearing those voices, you've got to shut them down
mm,
because, they will take over and then you'll just be comparing yourself to that person. And you're just not that person. You're not those other people and you're just doing your own thing. And yes, you want to resonate with your readers, but if you're spending your time comparing yourself to people too much and comparing your work to other people's work,
mhm,
you'll just talk yourself out of doing anything. I mean, I write on Substack. I write short stories on Substack, and that's where I just do my more like less polished short story writing. But I'm going to eventually, but I'm publishing it. You want people to, you read someone even on Substack who maybe only has like 100 subscribers and they write this insanely good short story. And you're like, how is everyone not reading this short story?
right.
How will I ever write a short story as good as this person nobody knows about? Yeah, you know what I mean? So even you
Mhm,
can get it. I feel like you can get it just with like a fellow creator that is still just starting themselves. And so I always say to new writers, you're probably intimidating someone who's been doing it longer than you have because they'll read your work and go, oh my gosh. And so I try to just come to everyone's writing and everything else I see as a fan,
mm,
and say, I love reading this. I love their work. That says I don't have to, I have to remind myself not to compare myself to it.
yeah,
And it helps being a mom because I have to remind my kids not to compare themselves to other people. And then you have to listen to your own advice,
right.
but it's really hard. And my best advice is to, the minute you feel yourself doing it, is to try to figure out how to stop yourself from doing it. Say, what, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'm not them. They're not me. Can I learn, or can I learn anything from them and make my stuff better? You can always do that too. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
Absolutely. Imposter syndrome is, very challenging.
Mhm.
I've had moments of doubt myself with my own writing. But,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right when you said that we shouldn't compare ourselves to other writers because, whether they are fellow indie writers or writers who have been writing in the industry for a long time, we can't compare ourselves to them. And that is something that we will touch on later
Mhm.
in the interview when we talk again about, our individuality as authors, but also making something that's familiar to fans of the genre. Now, I have two fun questions I want to ask you, Jessica. And the first one, I really want to hear your thoughts on this. So, a lot of my guests on the show, especially authors who are mothers, they've always told me a very interesting story is that, how they started their journey as authors. And one guest in particular, this guest, I want to say, is from last year's
Mhm.
lineup, Empire. And she explained to me that when she began writing her story, it was more so of a dare from her daughter that I will do this, mom, if you do this. And ultimately, that motivated her to write a story, but it went more beyond that. As she began writing the story, which is a young adult story, she realized that she wanted to write this book with the mindset that this is something that I would feel comfortable giving my kid to read if it was at a library or buying it at a bookstore. Jessica, for you also being a mother, would you also have the same belief that if Plastic Girl was written by someone else, perchance, would you trust your daughters or trust yourself to give that book or that series to your daughters to read?
I would. I would, yes. I have let my daughters have my books. They can read them. I don't force them to read them, obviously, because I know they've read the novella. For my daughters, it's particularly probably problematic because I originally wrote as a short story and I used their names, which I never would have done for an entire trilogy. But unfortunately, I published the novella and then I was like, okay, well, those are their names. So I think that my story is perfectly fine to have a young person read. I always tell parents when they take it, it's that if your child is particularly sensitive to the climate crisis and climate in general and has a lot of fear or anxiety around that, it just depends on what kind of reader they are. If they reading about it makes them feel better, this book will make them feel better and it's a good book for them. If reading about it's going to make them feel more scared, have more anxiety, and not help, then they shouldn't read it because that the whole book is that it's all about climate. So you don't want you want it. That's the main thing I'll say to young people about reading it. It's like just know that obviously you're getting into a story set in the climate apocalypse. If that's going to make you feel too sad, don't read it. But I think ultimately it will make you feel better reading it. And I mean, there are some relationships in the book, but I think they're all pretty tame. I mean, as far as anything like that. So, yeah.
Absolutely, of course. And especially, I know people have heard me on the show, knack YA novels, especially the newest stories that come out in the YA. But
yeah,
again, I'm going to save that for another segment of the interview. But I definitely agree with what you said, Jessica, that, you have to leave it up to like the parents to like, look at the story and feel like, okay, do I trust my kid? They're going to understand it, or is it too complex, or maybe the themes may go over their heads, or if they have questions about it. Questions are good, especially in fiction. It does bring up discussion, but ultimately it's about, making that decision of whether or not you as a parent would feel comfortable reading this book. And, they still may want to read it, but they may read it when they're older.
Well, I also think this one's not so much a parent question, it's for the reader question. So
Right.
for the young person, I mean, it's not really for the parent to decide if that topic makes them feel too sad. It's for, we're not talking about like graphic violence or graphic.
Oh, yes, of course.
It's like they should, a child, I would, fourth grade and up, you pick up the book and you read the back and you decide if that's the world you want to go into, But yeah. And I mean, yeah. And if the parents are controlling that very, tightly, then they should read the back of the cover and make sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And reading back of the cover, that's a whole discussion of itself when it comes to new books. But another question I want to ask you, Jessica, and I'm actually very curious to hear your thoughts on this, is for context for this question, a previous guest on my show mentioned on her social media that in today's climate for indie authors, we are in sort of a golden age or renaissance because there's such an increase in influx of new authors. And to some extent, that is true. The publishing industry has changed in the last 20 years, and independent books have greatly changed. I mean, the stigma behind it has pretty much withered away. Like if you were an indie author in the past, most people assumed that your book was not polished, it wasn't very professional. But nowadays, you can't even tell the difference between a traditionally published book or an indie book unless it had like, who published it, like what was the press house. Exactly. But even from that, I have had guests on the show offer their insight to this statement, and the answers have been very conflicting. Some agree with my previous guests that we are in a new age, a golden age. Some say that we are not and just entering that period. But others have gone even further and said that we are not in a golden age or renaissance because while there is an increase in indie author books, a majority of those books were not created with the creative pursuit in mind, in the sense that they wanted to, you know, build a career from being an author. They just wrote a book to just have it out there. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that mentality. If you just want to just write a book and not sell, that's completely fine. But it's different as if you wrote a book and it's like a check mark on your bucket list and it's just existing in this void. So, in your opinion, Jessica, from your experience, do you believe that we are in a renaissance of some kind, or maybe not?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, independent publishing has definitely, in the last 10 years transformed and is more accepted in a lot of circles. You can't just dismiss it anymore. It's clear that many independent authors are making a ton of money. I do think genre matters a lot. I think different genres are having a renaissance, I mean, when you talk about a genre like romance or any kind of romance title, romantasy, whatever, I think those indie authors do quite well on a business level. Like they make a ton of money, comparatively to maybe some other genres. I think horror is doing pretty well. I think Substack is an interesting thing. Just in the last couple months, that platform there are a lot of fiction writers on Substack. Whether or not it's hugely successful for them there on a monetary level is still to be determined. But I do think people are finding new voices there. There's a flourishing scene of fiction writers, writing on the platform and sharing their fiction. And that is all indie, direct to reader. I do think we are at a renaissance going in the direction for all publishing houses to the direct contact, the direct sales. And I think when you tie in direct sales, that's where independent publishers are a little bit, we've been doing this a little bit longer. We've been forming relationships with our readers directly. We are selling to them directly. And I do think what's changing is that readers and the audience and consumers are becoming more comfortable buying like that. Whereas in the past, I think people wanted to recognize the name, recognize the platform they're buying from, and we're a little more uncomfortable to purchase directly from your website. But I do think that is a little bit still hard, And if you're talking, we could go on about this a long time.
Yeah.
I do think there is a flourishing independent book scene with book writers and indie readers. I do think it's still very hard as an indie writer to get maybe the same kind of acceptance into certain festivals and certain, activities, certain platforms to review your books. There's still those gatekeeping things going on with independent.
Yeah.
So I think we are making progress, but still have a way to go. And, I worry with AI because I'm not I rant, but when indie publishing first started, it was a new thing and everyone was just like, oh, look, I can publish something up instantly. And so people were writing, there was people doing it serious, and then there was people just writing all kinds of randomness, and just publishing it. And I'm wondering when as AI kind of comes into the scene and everyone's starting to use it, including traditionally published authors, and everyone is playing around with it. And I'm not playing around with it yet because I'm just not comfortable with it yet. But but people are, obviously, and it's like, how will that transform indie publishing? Because when you can start to write everything with AI and mess around and go faster, how will that affect the confidence we've been building with our audiences, if that starts entering it. And so, yeah, it's a lot is going on. So I'm a little bit in the middle. I definitely think we've made a lot of progress, and I feel it's a definite, and in comics, it's a whole different game because indie comics have always been pretty accepted. And so that's not accepted, but it's still it's not like Marvel and DC, but people like the independent scene and the comic scene. So it's still a different thing. I think it's just quality. I mean, as independent creators, we need to put out quality. And so when you come into becoming an indie publisher or an indie writer, you have to do some research and figure out what it takes to do it right, so that you don't kind of degrade what everyone has been working on, right? You don't just write a novel and pop it up. You got to rewrite it. You got to get it edited. You got to get people and you got to get other professionals involved usually, and so, yeah.
That is very true. And that actually perfectly segues into the business side of being an author, which, as a little icebreaker, Jessica, for what you've said right now, so is it safe to say that your books are independently published through Wicked Tree Press?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So when did you well, firstly, how did Wicked Tree Press come about? And then ultimately, how did you decide that, Plastic Girl, the story itself, was best suited to go down the path of indie as opposed to, going traditional publishing and going through the query trenches, as a lot of authors have said on the show?
Well, so in my 20s, my first, I came out from college, got a job at Creative Artist Agency in the book and rights department, worked on a TV show as a writer's assistant, got an agent for my screenplay writing with my writing partner, and did everything exactly the traditional way, right? I queried agents, we got our agent, we went out with our spec script, we got a ton of meetings about it, we almost got it made, but it was a little too funny when everyone wanted to do Saw movies at that time, because I aged myself. And then we had a bunch of other spec scripts, all these great meetings, and a lot of almost things happened. Features are very hard, especially back then. And it was great. I was glad I did it that way. But when I decided to start writing books, the idea of starting that process again was so abhorrent to me. Now, don't get me wrong. If some agent just showed up and said, let me publish your book and, I'll take care of everything, I probably would have said yes. But I didn't want to send it to an agent, wait for them to give me all these notes, do all these changes, do all this stuff. Now, I did want to send it to an editor and I did want to get feedback. So I don't want to say that I didn't want that. I just didn't want to be gate kept for this particular title. Now, I've written other things. I would get at this point, I'm like, maybe I should get an agent at this point, go back to it, for literary stuff. But I wanted very much to do this independently when I started. Right. I wanted to write. And at first I was like, and the Plastic Girl novella was all I was going to publish independently at first. I was like, I'm going to publish a novella and I'm going to publish a comics. And I was kind of like, I'm going to do that. And then with the rest of the books, I'm going to do the queer, do a hybrid where you do traditional and you do independent.
Right.
But then I got into writing Plastic Girl, and it's a very strange story. It's very weird. And I wanted it to stay strange. I wanted to write it in the way I was writing it, and it's not the most popular, POV for YA. So I wanted to write in third person, and so I just kind of wanted to do it myself. And so at that point I was like, all right, well, how does someone do this themselves and have some kind of credibility, And so then I was like looking at libraries and what they looked at, like, what does a library want to accept your book, what do you need to do? And there's certain places you need to try to get your book reviewed, so I did all that. I was like, I got to reach out to Kirkus, I got to reach out to Forward Reviews and try to do a little bit of that. When you talk about business, try to do some things that get it on the radar of people that are buyers, and I don't know how successful I was at that with Plastic Girl, but I did do all those steps, and so it was like a big learning lesson. And yeah, it's still really hard to make money on books. Whether you're traditional or independent. I've had a little bit more luck with comics, to be honest, but I mean, at the same time, I've sold a lot of Plastic Girls and had a lot of readers get back to me and say they really enjoyed them. And, so it's just pushing it forward and going on to the next thing. And so, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to do it by yourself. And I will say, if you can query it and you can get an agent that you like and a publisher that you like, that is going to be easier, right? It's not. It's going to be faster, maybe, to There's some things that will be easier. The one thing that say, I hear a lot of traditionally published authors, because I'm in a part of a lot of writer organizations like SIFWA and Horror Writers Association and stuff, and we talk. And you have a lot of traditional authors come up to you and go, okay, I'm sick of my publisher. My book is now trapped with them. They've made me no money. You hear all this, and now I can't get the rights of my book back. And so that's the positive of being in control of your stuff, is that you can do whatever you want with it because you haven't got it trapped somewhere. And I know a lot of authors in both sides want to be a hybrid, because you want some stuff traditionally, and then the traditional authors want some things to be in their control and not have to be told exactly how to, it's hard.
Right.
I don't have the best answer for that. I do think all paths are valid as long as you take yourself serious as a professional. Like, I think when I get upset with the cynical people who publish, like, I don't know if it's cynical or it's just not knowing, but I just take yourself serious, act like you are doing this for a job. Like,
yes, very true.
Yeah. Don't just say, all right, I wrote something, here it is, world, like, do the steps to make it professional. And then you've done everything you can do. Yeah.
Now, another follow-up question to this, Jessica, and I've had a lot of authors, again, provide their insight to this. Would you consider yourself an author who writes to the market, the target audience, or would you consider yourself an author who writes to a certain reader group? Of course, your book is in the YA category, but within YA, are you marketing towards a specific readership for YA novels?
I'm definitely, for YA, I'm definitely trying to hit like the darker reader, the eco punk, the solar punk, the kids the young people who want to read about, like a slightly utopian version of a dystopian of the and eco punk being like a climate kind of infrastructure situation, like what if our world, and so and solar punk being a little bit more hopeful. So I am trying to hit a very niche audience with that particular series, and but also, like, it still kind of has a horror element to it. Plastic Girl has some scary moments in it, and so I'm always kind of on the peripheral trying to hit that horror crowd, whether it's in my comics or my short stories or even my sci-fi, because I have a lot of darkness inside. I like to explore darkness. I like to talk about monsters. I like to, talk about creepy things like evolution messing with our bodies, symbiotic, parasitic. That's like, the thing, right. And everything. That's a lot of stuff like that is going on in Plastic Girl. And, so I am trying to hit that audience. It is a hard audience, but horror audience is a very loyal audience. And so a lot of times I've been doing a lot of horror writing on Substack lately, and I am with Mary Shelley's School for Monsters, even though it is a middle grade, book. I'm definitely also trying to hit the older horror people, the younger horror fans and the older horror fans. So yeah, there's a little bit of that going on. But yeah, I fall pretty solid between horror, sci-fi, but so that wasn't and it's not my greatest strength. My marketing to the audience, as I just demonstrated, is something I still work on, because
same here.
I always think all books are for everybody. And one thing is, so I'm not great at writing to a trend. That's not, I have to write thinking about, I wasn't ever good at writing for a trend when I was a screenwriter either, which was ridiculous because I was in development and I should know better. But it's just, I always find a character and I'm just going to write that character. And hopefully, like with Mary Shelley's School for Monsters, at least that's in the zeitgeist. Like every once in a while, my interest, my weird little thing aligns with something that is popular, but not very often.
Yes, very true. I even struggle with hitting my target audience, and it's a struggle. It is a struggle, and it's a grind. And I think it ultimately comes down to, as we said earlier, what kind of writer and author we want to be. Because whenever we work on a book or a comic, we want to showcase our individuality, but depending on the genre that you're writing in, there are some expectations from the readership who knows, what they enjoy and what they like. No, we don't want to copy anybody. We don't want to do that. We definitely want to showcase who we are, to set ourselves apart from the rest. But we don't want to ever stray ourselves too far to where our stories are completely original, in the sense that it doesn't make sense and the readership is going to be confused. And I definitely think that goes hand in hand with networking, because when you network with people, they can help you understand, more about yourself than you already know. So I'm going to combine these together into one big question, Jessica.
Okay.
So just brace yourself. So ultimately, Jessica, in your opinion, how does networking help an author understand their individuality in an industry where some would say, oh, you should be like so and so, or write like this person, or as you said before, these are trending, or this is very popular? How would you answer that?
So how does networking with other authors and publishers and people help answer that question or help define that question? Is that kind of what you're asking me? I just want to make sure I understood.
Of course, ultimately, how does networking help an author understand their individuality as creators?
Yeah, I do think it's okay. So that makes sense. So the more creators you meet, the more writers you interact with, the more people you read, the more films you watch if you're, a filmmaker, but even more so being able to go listen to an author you like speak or a filmmaker you like speak, to understand like why they're writing what they're writing, why it appeals to you, why you would be somewhat interested in writing something similar, but you don't want to write something the same. I think that's all valuable. And every time I have a conversation with an author or a filmmaker or anybody doing anything one-on-one, I learn something not only about them or the industry that I might not have known if I'm listening and not just talking. And we all know we've been in the conversations with the person who talks and talks and talks. So if I'm listening, I can usually learn something new and learn something about myself. Like oh, what they're saying is really great. I should apply it to what I'm doing. Or what they're saying is definitely not what I'm into. So I definitely know I'm not that kind of writer. I don't want to write like that. I don't want to make decisions like that. And so I think with each networking moment, you do have a chance to learn a little bit, hone that down just a little bit.
Right.
And now on the flip side of that, at least when I was a screenwriter, you'll get told a lot what kind of writer you are. Especially in film, like back in the day, like you were a certain kind of genre writer. It was like your first, our first spec we went out with was a comedy horror. So that was kind of already a hybrid, and so like, and then they just expect that's what you're going to do. That's and I'm just not that kind of writer. I'm not going to write the same thing. I mean, if someone's paying me hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it, yeah, I'm probably going to write some of the same thing, and find a way to enjoy it. But like, if not, I'm going to, kind of explore the next thing that I'm getting interested in. But there is and so I do think there's a danger side of it too, is when people start reading you and expecting something from you, and then you're networking and they're like telling you, oh, I see that you're this kind of person. I mean, it's interesting to hear what someone thinks of you and thinks what you should be doing, but you also ultimately have to be careful not to just accept that, because you've got a lot of different stories inside of you. So, but I mean, as a business, it is important to have kind of focus. Like, my company's like where horror meets heart, so there is a lot of horror focus in my company. Yeah.
Absolutely. And as a add-on to that, are there any people you would like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you figure out the author you want to be in your journey?
Oh man.
I know there's always the one question that always stumps kids, because there's like, how many people can we name drop in the interview?
I know, right? Well, I do think just on a large level of women authors that have read throughout my life, like Ursula Le Guin, Octavia Butler, Margaret Atwood. When I started writing short stories, I mean, and I thought of these women because they were saying something, important in what they were doing, but they were also writing a riveting science fiction story that was also horrific sometimes, right? And so those three women in particular, their stories and their books really inspired me to keep writing that darker science fiction, that speculative sci-fi, and not just ever give up on that, even though it's always been like a side thing that I do. So I'm grateful for them, because I think they've always let me know that deep down inside, I'm a dark speculative science fiction writer. And sometimes I get distracted by other genres, but that's really like my first love. And then on like a more like when we talk about film and, writing in film, I would have to thank my original writing partner, Kim Pierce, now Kim O'Malley. We taught each other a lot about what we like to write and what we enjoyed. And also I wrote with my husband, Michael Judd. He's a director. He just got done with Young Sheldon. And we did our film together, what I like to write and what I don't like to write. Because when you write with a partner, you find out real quickly you do have some differences. You don't all want to write the same thing. And I would have to say, like, when I got into comics, I just want to thank the entire like indie comic scene in general, because everyone is so open and really helps you like figure yourself out in different ways. And I would say that someone who's really been very inclusive of me into indie comics was Russell Knowlton. And he was just really generous with ideas, suggestions, and inviting me into anthologies. I would say like David Schrader and Clay Adams invited me into their anthology, and just like that slow process of learning from them and doing that, and has been really great. And let me see. I mean, I'm not name dropping the right people. Probably I'm just going to start talking. And like, I honestly, just like even my booth mates, like you were talking about Matt Harry and Megan Haskell, I've learned a lot from them, just talking while we're working together and learning their process and what they do. And honestly, so much of that, and I would even say like Madeline Holly Rosing, Deborah Daughtry, all of these indie creators just like, come and talk to you, and you learn from them, and it's really great. So that's on the comic level. So everybody, I like to say, I learn a lot from everybody. But that's kind of what I would say. I'm obviously more of a personal person,
right?
I get inspired by a lot of people's writing, and I would say even the Substack community. Like I am learning a lot in short story writing there, just like not just engaging, not anything really crazy, but yeah. So I'm constantly inspired by people, but there are some people who've been I've had really great conversations with along the way that help you realize what you are and what you are not. So
amazing, Jessica. Absolutely amazing. Now you arrive at the final question of this amazing author interview. And this one's kind of be almost like another scenario question. So I'll give some context to this. So I've been doing this show now for about 6 to 7 years, and I've had the opportunity to meet a wide range of authors, from indie, hybrid, traditional, aspiring, debuting, upcoming, the works, touching almost all genres, save for autobiographical and memoir. And I've learned a lot from all these incredible people. And the major thing I learned about interviewing all these authors is that there's two paths in this industry: to be an author, to be known as an author. One is dedicated to the art, the other is dedicated to the business. Now, both lead to a lot of different goals and objectives, but the same outcome is what we all aspire to achieve, which is world-renowned success. But as we mentioned before, your goals have to be realistic in the sense that this is not a get-rich-quick money scheme being an author. Will we all like it to be? Absolutely, but that is not the case. And in this industry, there is no guarantee your first book is going to be a financial success. It's a hit or a miss sometimes. Now, are there exceptions to the rule? Absolutely. But that's what they are. They are the exceptions. And generally speaking, the average author is going to face a lot of hurdles and obstacles down the road. And that may be in part due to their objectives. Why do they want to become an author in the first place? What was their mentality? So here's a scenario, Jessica. Let's say you are hosting a writer's workshop and you have a class full of aspiring authors, writers, screenwriters, poets, the works. How would you teach them this lesson that while there is no guarantee in this industry your work is going to be a success, you should not think of that moment as a pitfall, but instead learn from it and grow and just refine your objectives of why you want to be a writer, screenwriter, comic writer, or even poet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think so. They just had a launch of a book, and it has not been successful.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to tell them what to do.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, go into a dark room. No, I'm just kidding. No. So I think first and foremost, I say this to the young people I work with, and I say this to myself, especially with books, and especially in the indie book world. I'm writing something that I want to write, a story with characters that I want to tell. I want the world to see. All right. But more importantly, I want people that know me to see. Like, I want my kids to read one day and go, oh, my mom cared about this, or my mom did this, or I'm using that as an example. Right. And so I think at the very first level, you have to have written a book for yourself.
Right.
And then maybe some people around you. Right. If you need an audience, like some close people around you. And you have to say to yourself every time you do a project, I think, if nobody, and it's easier for me because I come from screenwriting, so I'm used to having a pile of things that nobody has seen. So I've gotten a tough skin over the years, which led me here because I wanted people to see stuff. I was like, all right, I'm sick of all those projects that have, that are somewhere in some producer's thing, not getting done. So I think first and foremost, you have to have written the story for yourself and be happy with what you said and the story that you told and the characters you created for the world, and say to yourself, it's something, I'm not going to do a good quote, but it was like, I think it's from Dead Poets Society or something. It's like that you were here, that you told a story, you added your voice to the great story, and I think that has to be maybe your first goal. So then even if you don't achieve financial success or notoriety, or even if people don't like it, which first of all, there's going to be people who don't like everything. So
absolutely,
don't worry. Stephen King, there's got a bunch of people who don't like a bunch of his books, but he's doing fine. It's like, and anybody else, not just Stephen King. I don't want to pick on him, but and so then I would just say, well, what was it about the way I told this story that didn't appeal to people? Was I being stubborn? And you can do that with the way did I pick a POV that people didn't want to hear? Did I use a trope that they weren't interested in? Did I do something to my character that just wasn't engaging? Or was my first couple chapters just not very active and was just too much for people to get through? And you can kind of try to figure that out on a more technical level, instead of saying my story is just trash and why am I even trying to do this? And because the world's very saturated right now. So yes, getting anyone to read your work is very difficult, especially when you don't have one of the top 5 publishing companies behind you. So that means everybody, almost, besides the people at the top 5, right, are struggling about as much as you are as like a little indie author. Like, these independent publishing companies and these mid-sized publishing companies are having just as much of a hard time at some level getting seen as you are. And so getting seen is a whole different thing than writing that novel, right. And it's like, first you gotta, and my one friend, I forget who says to me, he's like, once you figure out your book's not succeeding, you have to figure out why. And you start with, is it my cover? Did I pick bad cover art? Is it my blurb? Okay, no, my cover's cool. I've checked, I've talked to people, I got a cool cover. Is it my blurb? When people read the back, they're like, oh, I don't, did I do a bad job on the blurb? And then if you, and then you're like, oh, have I picked good keywords to get people to come to me, through the internet? Right. And if you've picked the right keywords and you've done all those things right, so you can kind of reverse engineer the whole process. At some point you can say, all right, it might be the story, right? But that's not your first thing. Shouldn't be that I wrote a bad novel. It should be that maybe I marketed my novel incorrectly, and can I fix that? Can I fix it for this novel, or can I at least not make those same mistakes the next time? So that's what I would focus on mostly.
And I think those are, empowering words of wisdom, Jessica, which I think everyone can learn from. And I myself, I'm still learning, What can I do to improve my stories going forward, especially with my newest one coming out sometime this year. I've already made an announcement that beta reads, thank you, beta reads are going to be coming out in July. So that's a motivation for me to get the book ready, even if it's still in its rough draft form. That'll give me enough time to get feedback, improve upon it, and send it. Well, work on it first, then send it to my editor, so that way it'll be ready for publication. And honestly, Jessica, you've given so much incredible pieces of wisdom in this episode. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for another amazing author interview here on the show. I want to give a huge thank you to my good friend Jessica for coming on the show, making her official debut on the channel. And hopefully this won't be the last time we see her on the show. Maybe we can do a follow-up interview where we can talk about Mary Shelley's School of Monsters, her graphic novel series, and dive deep into that. So, Jessica, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as buy copies of Plastic Girl and Mary Shelley's School of Monsters?
Okay. The best place to find my shop is wickedtreepress.com. You can find me at Blue Sky, Jessica Maison, and I am I'm pretty active on Substack. So Monster of the Week is my publication there. And so you can sign up and get updates. And so that's probably the best place. But if you're not, I left Instagram and Facebook, sorry guys, and Twitter, so you can't find me there anymore. But everywhere. But I'm in Substack, Blue Sky, and Wicked Tree Press.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video, and be on the lookout for my first impressions review of Plastic Girl Book 1 in the Plastic Girl series. That will be coming out very soon. So make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with that. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below to stay up to date with all the upcoming author, historian, and other episodes coming on the channel for this month, as well as a special announcement that my website, The Wandering Scribe, will be coming out very soon. It's been a long time coming, so be on the lookout for that. And until next time, a huge thank you to Jessica for coming on the show. We wish her the very best with future projects she is working on. And, oh, one last thing I forgot to mention, Jessica, are you going to be at any events for the rest of the year?
I will be at San Diego Comic-Con. I have at least one panel. So I will be there, but I'm not tabling there. My next time you can stop by a booth is LA Comic-Con in September.
Awesome. I will also include that down below in the description of this video. And until next time, viewers and listeners, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all in the next episode.